Right now, somewhere in your banking app, there is a number quietly insulting you. My name is Nick, and if you bank with one of the three biggest banks in America, that number is 1/100th of 1%. Which means my friend Yvette, who has loyally parked $31,000 at the same bank since she was 22, earns $3 a year. 3. Her brother-in-law, Curtis, has almost the same money. Same federal insurance, same zero risk. He earns about $1,350, that is 450 times more, and Curtis is not smarter than Yvette. He filled out a form while half watching a cooking show. 15 minutes, and if your money is sitting where Yvette's is sitting, you are on the wrong side of that number today. Every finance channel on the internet is calling this the great high-yield savings comeback of 2026. It is not a comeback. It is something considerably stranger. And Curtis is going to show you why right after he nearly loses all of it. Quick warning before we start. Every rate I quote today moves, sometimes weekly. So check the live numbers before you act on anything here. I will give you a checklist at the end. Now let's start with your gap, because you almost certainly have one and it's bigger than you'd guess. The best high-yield savings accounts in America right now pay up to 4.5%. That's what you could be earning. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation surveys more than 500 institutions and publishes what Americans actually earn instead. That number is 38 hundredths of 1%. It hasn't moved since April. So the typical saver earns about 1/12 of what's available. And that's the generous version, because online banks are dragging that average upward. If your money sits at a big brick-and-mortar bank, you're at 1 penny per $100 per year. Leave $100 there for 12 months and you earn a penny. The gumball machine would reject it. Here's why that's worse than boring. Inflation in June ran 3.5%. Core came in at 2.6%. So your money isn't sitting still, it's shrinking. Every year you leave it, it buys you less. Yvette's $31,000 loses roughly $1,000 of purchasing power annually, while her bank hands her $3 for the trouble. Curtis beats inflation by about a point. Same country, same week, same risk. That's the whole story, and almost every video on this topic gets it backwards. Because here's the thing about the comeback narrative. Rates didn't come back. They fell. In the summer of 2023, top accounts paid over 5%. Then the Federal Reserve started cutting, 6 times between September 2024 and the end of 2025. The federal funds target dropped from 5.25 down to 3.5. And banks passed that along to savers immediately, enthusiastically, in full. And by immediately, enthusiastically, in full, I mean they cut your rate faster than they ever raised it. 4.5% today isn't a recovery. It's the tail end of a long, quiet decline. So why is everyone suddenly shouting about savings accounts? 3 reasons. Only one should matter to you. First, the cutting stopped. The Fed has held all year. At the June meeting, 9 of 19 officials projected the next move would be a hike, not a cut. Second, inflation climbed back up, so people started checking whether their money was keeping pace. Yours probably isn't. And third, this is the one that matters, for the first time in about 15 years. A boring savings account beats inflation without you doing anything clever. Not in 2009, not in 2021 when the national average was 0.04% and your savings were quietly evaporating. Right now, boring works. So the comeback isn't that rates got good, it's that they stopped getting worse and people finally looked up. Which leaves you with a much better question. Where has your money been for the last 3 years and who's been keeping the difference? The answer has an unmemorable name. Deposit beta. Deposit beta measures how much of a Fed rate change your bank passes on to you. Fed hikes a full point, your bank raises you half a point, that's a beta of 50%. Simple enough. Here's the part that isn't. Researchers studying U.S. banking data across multiple rate cycles found deposit beta is asymmetric, and the asymmetry runs exactly the direction you'd guess. When the Fed cuts, your bank cuts you fast and cuts you fully. When the Fed hikes, what reaches you is slow, partial, and frequently indistinguishable from zero. You absorb the losses, you wait for the gains. Deloitte politely described deposit pricing as downwards flexible and upwards sticky, which is a very expensive way of saying the elevator only goes down and somebody set the stairs on fire. Now watch what that did to somebody real. 2022 into 2023, the Fed ran the fastest hiking cycle since the 1980s. 0 to 5.25% in about 16 months. And over that same stretch, Yvette's bank moved her savings rate from 1/100th of a percent to, brace yourself, 1/100th of a percent. Congratulations, Yvette. 16 months of the most aggressive monetary tightening in 40 years, and your reward was nothing. They didn't fail to pass it along, they declined to. And it worked, because almost nobody left, which is where this stops being your personal problem and becomes a national accounting problem. Americans hold roughly $10.2 trillion in savings and checkable deposits. Trillion, your money is somewhere in that pile. And a serious chunk of it sits under 0.5%, while 4.5% is available to anyone with a phone and 10 minutes. Curtis was in that pile too, right up until last spring. Over the 2 years he spent waiting, he gave up about $4,000 in interest by doing absolutely nothing, which remains the easiest way to lose $4,000 ever devised. The platform Raisin estimated that if every household moved to a competitive rate, Americans would collectively earn about $396 billion more per year. I'll flag that honestly, Raisin sells access to these accounts, so treat it as directional, not gospel. But cut it in half, and you're still looking at $200 billion a year that exists, that's legally yours. That carries no risk, and that nobody collects. Now let me correct a number you have definitely seen. You've probably been told the average American household holds $62,410 in the bank, usually by someone trying to make you feel behind. That figure is nearly useless. Ignore it. The median household, the one actually in the middle, the one you're far likelier to be, has $8,000. The mean is almost 8 times the median, because a handful of very wealthy households drag the average into orbit. Anytime you see an average balance without a median beside it, someone is being sloppy or selling you something. And that survey data is from 2022, so it's 4 years stale. So you're probably not sitting on 60 grand. You're closer to 8. And here's where I know exactly what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, Nick, on $8,000, the difference is about $330 a year, and that's not going to change my life, so why bother? That's fair, it's the right objection. Let me answer it properly. $330 is your car insurance deductible. It's a flight home. It's the emergency brake fund that stops one bad week from becoming a credit card balance you carry for 2 years. And you get it for 15 minutes of typing. That's over $1,300 an hour. You will not be paid that rate for anything else you do this year. Then it scales with you. The day your balance hits $20,000, that same 15 minutes is worth $800 a year. At $50,000, it's over $2,000. You're not doing this for the balance you have today. You're doing it once, for every balance you will ever have. So your money is real, and the gap is real. Which brings us to the actual question of this video. Why haven't you moved it? The research here is almost funny. The average American has banked with the same institution for about 17 years. 17, that's longer than most cars, most jobs, and a statistically uncomfortable share of marriages. 36% have never even considered switching. Surveys on rate awareness are all over the map. One 2026 study found 7% of Americans earning 4% or better. Another found 22%, but they agree on the shape. Somewhere between 25% and 40% of people cannot tell you their own savings rate. Now, I want to be very clear with you. This is not you being lazy. Your direct deposit is already routed there, your auto pay is linked, your bill history lives there. Yvette's debit card has been in her wallet so long the numbers have worn smooth, and that card is doing more to keep her money in place than any interest rate ever could. Switching feels like a Saturday of paperwork, so it becomes next Saturday, then the one after. And nobody is going to interrupt that. No bank is sending you a letter that says, "We are paying you 1 penny per $100, and there's an institution down the street paying 450 times that." That letter does not exist. Writing it is nobody's job. You were never failing at this. There was simply never a moment built into your life where anyone was going to tell you. The entire relationship is designed around the assumption that you won't check, and statistically, they're right. By the way, this is exactly the kind of thing we pull apart inside our school community, where we run actual numbers instead of vibes. Links in the description. Now, Curtis, I promised you Curtis, because Curtis did everything I'm telling you to do, and it nearly cost him everything. When Curtis moved his money, he did what you'd do. He searched for the biggest number, and the biggest number is almost never the right one. Some advertised rates are promotional and quietly reset after 3 or 6 months, long after you've stopped checking. Some are tiered, where the headline rate applies to your first slice, and everything above it earns pocket lint. There's a credit union advertising 10% right now, which sounds spectacular until you read that it applies to your first $1,000. That's $100 a year. One nice dinner for correctly identifying a marketing gimmick. But Curtis's real mistake was subtler, and it's the thing I most need you to take from this. Several of the best rates he found weren't offered by banks. They were offered by apps, clean interfaces, friendly design, and a small line of text reading FDIC insured. Here's what that line actually means for you. Federal deposit insurance covers $250,000 per depositor, per insured bank, per ownership category. Apps are not banks. They partner with banks and pool your money into shared accounts where the insurance is supposed to pass through to you. And that pass through depends entirely on somebody somewhere, keeping an accurate record that your money is yours. In 2024, a middleware company called Synapse, which sat between dozens of these apps and their partner banks, went bankrupt. Over 100,000 people were locked out of their own money. The ledgers had never been properly reconciled. At one app alone, roughly 13,700 customers who deposited about $65 million were offered a combined total under $12 million. There are documented cases of people who put in tens of thousands and were told the bank had a few dollars in their name. The money was technically sitting in FDIC-insured banks the whole time. Here's the distinction that should genuinely worry you. Insurance protects you when a bank fails. It does nothing at all when the company standing between you and the bank loses track of you. Curtis had moved $30,000 into one of these apps for an extra 15 basis points. On $30,000, 15 basis points is $45 a year. He got out before anything happened. But that was the trade he almost made, a real chance at losing everything for $45. So when you compare accounts, your first question isn't what's the rate, it's whose name is on the charter. Ask that before you ask anything else. Curtis learned that. And then he learned the second thing, which is the one nobody tells you. Your savings interest is taxed as ordinary income, federal and state. Interest on U.S. Treasury bills is fully taxable federally, but exempt from state and local income tax. So the comparison you see on a rate site, 4.5% savings versus 4.15 on a one-year Treasury bill, is not the comparison that matters to you if your state taxes income. The bigger number can lose. Run it for a top bracket earner in California. $450 in a savings account nets about 2.2% after tax. The same rate from a Treasury bill nets about 2.8 because the state never touches it. That's roughly 27% more after-tax income for a nearly identical asset. Live in a state with no income tax? That advantage vanishes and the savings account wins on convenience. So your right answer depends on your zip code, which is an extremely annoying thing to be true, but there it is. Yvette, for what it's worth, lives in Ohio and has a modest balance, so she should stop reading about Treasury bills and just open the savings account. Half of getting this right is knowing which half you can skip, and the same gap exists everywhere, by the way. The national average one-year CD pays 1.65%, the best ones pay 4.35%. This isn't a savings account problem, it's a shopping problem. Now, before you build a bunker out of treasury bills, let me argue against myself. A video about savings accounts that skips this part is just an advertisement. Cash is a terrible place to build your wealth. Over the last century, there has not been a single 20-year stretch where US stocks lost money. Not one. Over 20 years, $10,000 in stocks historically became something like $67,000. In cash, about 18. That gap is the difference between retiring and having a long, thoughtful conversation with your kids about their spare room. But 2026 is unusual, and here's why. Vanguard's 10-year forecast for US stocks, published in January, sits at 3.9 to 5.9% annualized. Cash pays around 4. When a decade of expected stock returns barely clears what a savings account pays today, holding more cash is more defensible than it's been in 15 years. That's a model, not a prophecy, and models have been wrong about stocks for most of my adult life, but it's a real argument, and it means just invest everything is lazier advice this year than usual. So here's where your cash actually belongs. Your emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of your expenses, money you need within 1 to 3 years. Sinking funds for the things you already know are coming, the tires, the deductible, the wedding you're in, whether you like it or not. And I want to sit on that emergency fund for a second because only about 46% of American adults can currently cover 3 months. That statistic is not a statistic. That's the difference between a transmission failure being a bad weekend and a transmission failure being the thing that starts the debt. It's whether you can say no to a job that's destroying you. 4.5% doesn't make you rich. It makes your cushion grow while you sleep instead of shrinking while you sleep. Yvette's cushion has been shrinking for 19 years, and she has never once been told. Everything past 3 years, though, belongs somewhere with upside. Put your retirement in a savings account because the rate felt safe, and you'll have successfully protected yourself from the wrong danger. Which brings us back to Yvette, and to the only math I actually need you to keep. Yvette has $31,000. A year from now, at her rate, she'll have $31,003. In a competitive account, about $32,400. $1,300 for filling out a form. Now stretch it out. $30,000 left at the national average for 10 years becomes about $31,000. The same $30,000 at 4.5 if rates held becomes roughly $46,500. $15,000 of difference, same money, same risk, conjured out of nothing but a Tuesday evening and mild irritation. So here's your checklist. It's Curtis's checklist. Really, he paid for it the expensive way so you don't have to, and it's short enough to run tonight. Confirm your rate is permanent, not promotional. Confirm it applies to your whole balance, not just the first slice. Confirm you're depositing with an actual chartered bank or credit union, not an app sitting on top of one. Stay under $250,000 per bank per ownership category. And if you're in a high tax state with a real balance, run the treasury bill comparison first. That's it. That's your whole move. I'm not a financial advisor, and this isn't financial advice. It's arithmetic, and you should check my arithmetic. If you want to go deeper on this, our school community is free and the link is below. But here's what I keep coming back to. The high yield savings comeback of 2026 isn't about interest rates at all. Rates went down. The banks didn't get generous. The Fed didn't get kind. Nothing was handed back to you. The only thing that changed is that enough people finally looked. Yvette's money didn't underperform because she made a bad decision. It underperformed because she never made one. And the whole system was built patiently and profitably on the assumption that you wouldn't either. Curtis didn't beat her because he was smarter or braver or better with money. He nearly torched the whole thing chasing an extra $45. He beat her because one evening he looked. So go look. Not at the market, not at your portfolio, not at anything complicated. Open your banking app, find the interest rate on your savings account, and say it out loud. If that number embarrasses you, congratulations. You've just found the highest paying 15 minutes available to you this year. And unlike everything else in personal finance, this one doesn't require you to be right about the future.